We're in the midst of a huge transformation where our peers, communities, and workplaces are all really melding into one. Welcome to Reimagining Company Culture. My name is Christina Giordano, she, her, and hers, and I am the Senior Partnerships Manager here at AllVoices. Today, I am very excited to welcome our next guest onto the interview series, Jason Bingham. He's the president of the Residential HVAC and Supply business of Trane Technologies. Jason, it's so good to see you. If you want to share a little bit about yourself for our listeners, including your pronouns, and when you were younger, do you remember how exactly you answered the question, what do you want to be when you grow up?
Well, thank you, Christine. It's very nice to be here, and I appreciate the invite. Um, it's an interesting question because it's the same answer, but very different reasons in different phases of my life. So originally, I did want to be a leader. That's what I wanted to be, but it was more about the authority and respect I was looking for at that time. And then when I actually became a leader, and I struggled for a while in the role, and I realized my definition of leadership was backwards. And when I finally did that, I pivoted to who I wanted to be, which is to be the best leader I can be. And that was now aimed at the opportunity to make a real difference through that role.
I love that answer. Just being a leader, seeing what other kind of leaders look like in our lives as well, and then pivoting that definition. I think leadership is a big part of why someone joins or stays at an organization as well. And there's been a lot of conversations around company culture. How do you define that, especially from an executive leadership level, knowing that it's something that's always changing? How do you think about really keeping a pulse on company culture, both from a qualitative and quantitative way?
Awesome question. Probably best if we start with the definition of culture. It can be a little fuzzy. And so my definition is a team's beliefs about how things get done around here that then guide their actions and decisions. So it's beliefs turning into behaviors. And so how do you measure that? Quantitative, qualitative? You can actually get some pretty strong quantitative metrics around beliefs. You have engagement surveys and things like that that can be very telling. Honestly, though, my favorite part is the behavior piece. And so it comes down to leaders watching and listening what's going on in your culture. What are people really saying and talking about? Is it about teaming? Is it about customers? Is it about purpose? Or is it about individuals and those kinds of things? You can get a great, although qualitative, a real life feel for where your culture really is by simply watching and listening to how people talk.
Yeah, you have to be actively listening, offer those channels and different avenues for people to provide their feedback in a really consistent way and then demonstrate that you listen to them as well. I know that everybody has a role to play in creating a great place to work, really empowering folks. It's not one person or team's responsibility to ensure it's the quote unquote best place to work, but everybody has their unique role to play. As president, you hold a pretty high one as well. What is your unique role as president of the organization to really lead and participate in the company culture of the company?
So my belief is the greatest influencer on our culture is the leader, um, because they have authority over how things get done around here, which is that definition. Therefore, everybody's watching the leader to decide what they do, what they believe about this culture, and therefore how they behave. The higher you go in an organization, the more influence you have on that culture because you're influencing the leaders that are influencing the organization. So, as president, I have the greatest responsibility of our culture. What I say and do will decide a lot about our culture. And so I take that responsibility very seriously. I want to make sure we're building a culture of candor. So, for example, if I get somebody who challenges me and is candid with me, but I go defensive, I've just taught everybody that we don't want a culture of candor, right? And it can get as simple as, do I want us to be a strong execution type company where we show up to meetings on time and everything? But if I don't show up to meetings on time, nobody else will either, right? So again, if I don't lead with the right behaviors, most likely the organization won't either.
Yeah, you definitely need to have that alignment between what you say your values are, what you say the behavior that is celebrated at a company, and what is actually modeled by the leader, by leaders and managers themselves, because people take cues from that too. In addition to being president and a leader at your company, I know you're also an author. What was your motivation for writing Culture Shift, the ABCs of Business Leadership?
It's pretty simple. I had the opportunity to be in that first leadership role where I learned a ton. And as I went to the next level of leadership, what could I give anybody else? And so I wanted to be able to describe what I'd learned in that role so that others could easily learn the same lessons.
Pass the knowledge forward. I think that's always important too. And when you can immortalize it in a book as well and a resource for folks, just making sure it's accessible, something that employees and kind of team members are looking for as well is consistently developing their skills, growing within their role, and looking to their employers also to support their full lives, both in their personal lives and with their families. How would you say the company is really showing up and leaders for the full lives of employees at Trane Technologies?
But first is to recognize we don't understand their full lives. And so you need to fully empower them to to do what they need to do in their lives, right? So trust your people to find the balance themselves. And that means, yeah, count outcomes. We all do that, but empower them on the when and the where that work gets done, because then they can go find their balance. I think the second is to consciously bring the personal side to work, uh, creating sharing moments where people can share what's going on in their lives, highlighting personal milestones, asking about how they're doing and really meaning it, looking for the answer. I think all of those things start to bring the full person to work. And then the third, I would say, is full support for their health and well-being. Trane Technologies has done a great job with the Be Well platform we've created that enables us to fully support our employees in their entire lives.
I appreciate what you said in the beginning to your response as well as you're not going to know the full lives of employees. You have to trust and empower and not expect folks to really come to work and be ready to share their personal stories if you don't build that environment of psychological safety, trust, meaningful, authentic relationships. People can tell when you actually mean, how are you? Or like, how are you really doing as well? One of the things that companies can do too, in addition to having really strong leadership, modeling that behavior, is talking about that radical flexibility. So what you're saying in terms of the when, where, and most efficient way to do work, the adoption of radical flexibility raises the number of employees defined as high performing by one study by 40%. What role does radical flexibility play in your company culture?
Well, first of all, Christina, I love all these questions. You've obviously thought through this subject well, and I love this term, radical flexibility. Um, as I think about that, in a corporate environment, there's a structure in place. And so, unless you define the new norm, everybody will assume the old norm. And so, for us to create radical flexibility, we created the new norm, what we call the future of work. And we defined the four different roles from fully remote to fully in house. And so, people could immediately see that we are open and very flexible as an organization. We also have done things like empowering flexibility in schedules, allowing people to block off sometimes so they can have their own thought time. We've done some simple things that have been very powerful, like instead of 60-minute meetings, we have 45. And that's been a powerful deal because you've got 15-minute gap to at least catch your breath and eat a quick meal or whatever, versus the 60 going back to back to back, and you end up being late to every meeting. And some of the things we've been kind of hectically used to. Another thing we did was we invested in a tool called Viva Insights. I think it's from Microsoft. And it's a tool that the individual uses to analyze their schedule and also automate some gap time within that schedule. So there's cool tools we've created as well.
Yeah, I think love that efficiency piece, tools, and really thinking about the structure, the time that you are empowered to do your best work. How do you resource, especially those managers, to really kind of lead with curiosity, lead with empathy, vulnerability, build those connections, and really to have those hard conversations where you don't necessarily know what the person is going to say, or kind of how do you open that up?
Great question. The first thing I'd say is this is a passion of mine, this idea of culture of candor and everybody feels safe. And that's probably the first answer to your question is teaching our leaders to create that psychological safety within their teams and with their individual people. Um, so it's practicing. So for instance, my leadership team actually practiced this in real time. So we throw a subject on the floor like something, and we enable people to talk what they're really feeling about that. So you create this psychologically safe environment, and they get to practice that. I think the other thing we do well is give some tools. So we call it direct with respect, and we have the tools to help people do that. SBI, situation, behavior, impact, and we give people the tools to do that. And then the other thing I think we do very, very well is instead of it being these really tough discussions, you can make it easier by making it strength based. So if you start with somebody's strengths, and admire them for that, appreciate them for that, but then talk about the overuse of strengths and some of the gaps that creates. Even the tough discussion becomes easier because it comes from a strengths perspective. And so it's easier for people to both accept it as well as start the discussion about it.
Yeah, that reframing around the conversation, really starting at that middle point as well, and really recognizing that person's strengths. I think that is part of effective communication. I think that there is a lot of kind of things that are going on in people's lives that it's job related, not job related as well. And you can't separate those two, as we were talking about earlier in this conversation too. You don't know what's going on unless folks feel comfortable sharing. And there's an incredible amount of burnout, unfortunately. What tools are you providing to managers to really address burnout and proactively get ahead of it before that person reaches that critical moment?
Another great question. I think some of the things we've already talked about are to hit at this a little bit, the empoweredness, the empowered schedules, the forced gaps. It gives people that breath, and so they can reduce some of that burnout. Another thing that we did, we created a culture committee, and we asked them to address this issue. And what they came up with was a recognition platform. So all of our associates can recognize each other and thank them for work they did. That helps, that praise and positive energy helps dissolve the negative or burnout energy, right? So I think that's helped a lot. And then the other thing our company did is really gather around our purpose. We like to challenge what's possible for a sustainable world. And we created a platform that could be used by all of our employees to together decide focus areas of where we wanted to make a difference, where we wanted to challenge possible. And then we empower those people to work together to go solve that, even though it may not had anything to do with what our company does. And so it was kind of like using work time to go run a project. And in so doing, gets rid of the burnout, right? Because you're not necessarily doing your day job, you're doing this other thing you're passionate about.
Yeah, I think that makes a huge difference when you think about it in that way as well, and have those healthy boundaries. You're really in touch with that self-awareness as well. We've talked about that culture of candor, really empowering and enabling folks to do their best work with psychological safety, high trust. They are big topics, and I think they also came to the forefront, especially radical flexibility in the last few years with the pandemic, kind of that forced innovation, if you will, business as usual out the window. What are some of the patterns or changes you've seen in the people, talent, culture space that you are most excited by, and why? We could have talked about them already, but anything that you want to kind of touch base on?
Glad you're hitting on this because this is the positive side of all the stuff we've been through over the last, what's coming out good in the new norm. I think that's a really insightful question. My first reaction is the teamwork piece. I have been personally blown away with the challenges we've gone through in the last 2 years and how the team's only gotten stronger. It's almost like we figured out we needed each other and then figured out that by being stronger as a team, we were able to solve this stuff easier together. And that's only garnered the commitment to the team. So I don't know if you call that a new pattern, but I'm very excited to see that come to the forefront. Now, I would say a new pattern, and has a negative connotation to it, but the energy of coming to work. People want to see their teammates again, right? We were kind of stranded for a while, and now we have people come to work usually on the Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday time frame, and the energy in this building is really, really cool. The excitement and the time people spend together. So I think there is a new pattern of I want to go to work because there's an energy there. And then I want to go home on Friday too. But, I want my flexibility. But I do like that office time as a new pattern. And I think the third one I just popped in my head here is we actually know each other better now, right? We're living in each other's houses, not just environments at work. We're seeing dogs and kids and that kind of stuff. And I think it brought the whole person into the work environment. And I think that's a really good thing.
We do know each other a lot better now than we did 3 years ago. I also think having a hybrid work model too allows folks to really define kind of what the purpose of the office is, collaboration, really making the best use of time there as well, while also having time to work remotely and have that flexibility as well. So it's a good mix. Can you give an example of how you've innovated in the employee experience this past year, over the past couple of years, and what was the end result of what you tested or did differently, whether it's a program, policy, or initiative?
Yeah, and I don't know if you'd call it innovation, but I love what we did around what we called leadership principles. Um, I talked about how culture is the beliefs that guide the behaviors. Well, we want to, instead of having, most company has values written down, we wrote down leadership principles, and that term was meant that to be, first of all, we are all leaders in the company. And second of all, the principles are synonymous with behaviors. And so they were easy to see, simple language that described the behaviors we wanted in our company. And I think that was very powerful for our people to see. It was a much better descriptor of the culture we were trying to create. When I think about it, the virtual meetings was a powerful innovation. Not only could we use that tool now, but in the past, for instance, I would have extended leader meetings, 200 people or so getting together, going through our strategies at the beginning of the year so we could all get aligned. That meeting turned into an all company meeting. And we had that change made the entire 8,000 employees we have in our company aligned at the beginning of the year, when in the past it was just 200. So that technology, I think, was valuable. I know the other one I would think about is the workforce communication platforms that Trane Technologies is using, so that no matter if you're connected or not across our organization, you're able to use these apps and these platforms to not only learn, but to share your thoughts.
Yeah, the leadership guiding principles, the technology. I think that definitely is a good answer to innovation and just how you're doing things differently, consistently auditing the employee experience. Jason, is there anything that I didn't ask that you want to share with folks listening, or underscore any key takeaways you hope people really bring with them after hearing our conversation today?
Yeah, I will. There's one more thing that I talked about, this idea of purpose, and my my team has taught me that if you not only describe your purpose, but you measure it to assure you're actually delivering on that commitment, when those two things come together, that purpose turns into an energizing force in a company. And what I've been able to see with what Trane Technologies does with challenge what's possible and how we use scientific metrics to confirm we're delivering on our promises and commitments, that makes people feel like they're a part of something bigger and drives this extra energy that I've just been blown away about. So that would be, I'd mention that piece of the equation.
Know, define, and measure your purpose. Jason, thank you so much for being on Reimagining Company Culture this afternoon.
Yeah, it was my thrill. Thanks for the invite.
Of course, and as a reminder for folks who are listening, at AllVoices, we really believe in employees and employers being seen, heard, and understood, and know it's a requirement for the business to really succeed overall. Have a great rest of your day, everyone.